friends, welcome back to Coffee, Crochet, and Conversation, and welcome to the season finale. That's right, bestie, we made it. Noisy pets and all. Honestly, I can't believe we made it either. 20 episodes. That's no small thing. If you've been here since episode 1, thank you for sticking around through the awkward phase while I figured out what I wanted to keep, what I wanted to toss, and what absolutely did not work. And if you wandered in somewhere along the way, hi, you're here now, and that's what counts. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. My numbers might not be big, viral, internet breaking numbers, but they're growing, and that's because of you. I second guessed myself hard in the beginning. I fought Earl more than once about deleting everything and just giving up. But every week, a few more of you showed up, listened, followed, and let me know that you enjoyed my particular brand of chaos. And that kept me going. Before we get into today's topic, let's do a quick weekly check-in because honestly, it's kind of brand around here. This week, I was really struggling to find the line between pushing my limits, especially because now I've added lifting, and just straight up not fueling my body enough. I've been way under eating, trying to power through, and shockingly, my body was like, absolutely not. I had to stop a couple of my running workouts a couple minutes early, nothing major, but enough to know that something wasn't right. Well, the old me would have called that failure. New me is finally learning that stopping because your body needs it isn't quitting. It's just a data point. It's information. You adjust, you learn, and you grow. Progress. Add to that the fact that where I live in Ohio, it's cold. Everything outside is aggressively white. The sun disappears at like 4:30, and mentally, it's just that time of year. The good news is this week we are heading into the last week of school and the last week of work for my husband, and then everybody's off into the new year. So light at the end of the tunnel. But this week was a reminder that pushing yourself without support isn't strength. It's just exhaustion with like better PR. And honestly, that ties perfectly into today's episode because this time of year has a way of tightening everything. Expectations get louder. Guilt creeps in. Old habits and traditions show up like, hey, bestie, remember me? Even when they weren't healthy to begin with. The holidays have a weird way of putting chains back on things we thought we had already worked through. So today, we're going to be talking about breaking chains, but gently, and naming the things that keep us stuck. And before we go any further, I want to say this very clearly. Awareness is not blame. Not for where you are, not for what you're still working through. Naming something doesn't mean you failed. It means you're paying attention. So grab your coffee, your tea, your project, get comfy, and let's talk about the stuff we're ready to stop carrying into the new year. So let's start by talking about the chains themselves, because most of them aren't obvious. They're not dramatic. They're not loud. They're more like, missing one stitch in a row and you can tell something's off, but you can't quite figure out where yet. These chains don't look like problems. They look like tradition. They look like politeness. They look like this is just how our family does things, even when none of us are actually enjoying it. There are so many toxic traditions we keep simply because that's how it's always been. Please ignore the dog. He is up because I'm trying to record this in the afternoon, and he's not being cooperative. So we don't ever stop to ask if these traditions are still serving us. We just repeat them on autopilot, even when they cause stress or resentment or straight up dread every single year. It's like carrying a heavy weight that you never trained for, but somehow you're expected to lift it anyway. and you don't realize how heavy it is. And it's not just you. More than half of Americans describe the holidays as stressful, with family expectations being one of the biggest triggers. So if you feel tense before you even arrive, you're not broken. You're responding normally to a system that has not yet been updated. And family expectations during the holidays, that's a whole category on its own. Who hosts? Who shows up? Who never shows up? Who's expected to help? And who somehow gets to sit quietly in the corner and never have to lift a finger? Who has to bring a dish? Who mysteriously never does? And yes, I'm looking at you, the favorite. We've touched on that on a prior episode. And especially, who's allowed to speak and who learned a long time ago that staying quiet keeps the peace. So they just sit there, counting down the minutes until they can leave. These roles get assigned early, and somehow they're still enforced decades later, even if the person who made the rules is gone. The weight is still there. And sometimes it's just dressed up as in memory of, or they would have wanted it this way. Another big chain that shows up here, guilt. And let's call it what it is. Guilt is often used as a control mechanism. Not always intentionally, but very effectively. It sounds like, well, I just wanted you to be here. Or, it wouldn't be the same without you. And suddenly, you're rearranging your entire life, your time, your energy, your needs, or your kids' sometimes, just so somebody else doesn't feel disappointed. Guilt is basically that overbearing parent of people pleasing. And then there's her cousin, perfectionism, the sneakiest chain of all. It shows up disguised as, I just want things to be nice, or I just want everyone to be happy, even if you're not. Wanting things to be nice is fine. Believing it's your responsibility to make everything perfect, smooth, magical unicorn, emotionally safe for everyone else, that's not kindness. That's pressure. And it almost always lands on the same people every single time, year after year. And here's the kicker. Perfectionism is directly linked to higher levels of anxiety and burnout, especially when you're talking about high pressure seasons like the holidays. So if you're exhausted, overwhelmed, or resentful, it is not in your head, it's a pattern. So stop and ask yourself, why do I have to be the one? Is everyone else carrying this weight? If they're not, you don't have to either. And if they are, then maybe a conversation needs to happen about what needs to change so nobody has to. And I want to say this clearly because I know somebody out there needs to hear it. Being nice does not mean being a doormat. You can be kind and still have boundaries. You can be loving and still say no. And you can opt out without being cruel. Niceness that costs you peace isn't kindness, it's self-erasure. This is why naming things matters so much. Naming something is often the first act of rebellion. You don't have to confront anyone yet. You don't have to change anything today. Just seeing the change, calling it what it is, and admitting that this doesn't feel good, that's perfect. Because once something has a name, it loses a little bit of its control. And that is where real change starts. All right, before we get any deeper, it's time for our humorous break. It's time for Stitch Happens. And today's story is not about yarn behaving badly. It's about me, not really behaving badly, gravity behaving badly, and me having bad luck. This is one of those stories that doesn't need written down. Now, normally I try to write at least a general idea of my stories, but this one's so old and I've told it so many times, it's better off the cuff. And if I write it, I'll overthink it. So I'm just going to tell it the way it is, as it exists in my brain, which is loud, traumatic, and funny now that nobody's bleeding. Let's just say Cinderella's head got busted open, stitches were involved, and it's a very strong reminder that sometimes the chains you're dragging is thinking that you are invincible. All right, deep breath. Ready? Here we go. So I was probably 8 years old at the time. And we lived in the project's apartment development area. It was in a circle. And my best friend lived at a different apartment in the same circle. And between us was a big field. Well, they had mowed and there was all this dried, dead grass. And we decided we were going to play Cinderella. And we were going to do the part where she's feeding the chickens. And we were going to use this dead grass to feed the chickens. Well, we find this big glass plate. And I don't want to say it was her idea. I can't remember whose idea it was. But we were going to put the grass on the plate and throw the plate in the air. And then the grass would go everywhere and would feed the chickens. So we did this and I'm looking up like, where's the plate? And then something hits my head. So I put my hands on my head and I pull them down and I'm covered in blood. She's freaking out. I'm freaking out. But my hands are just a bloody mess. So I run to my mom, holding my hands out. She sees me. She goes into panic mom mode, which, fair. She rushes me to the sink and she's focused on my hands and she keeps rinsing my hands. And she's going, I don't see, where are you cut? Where's all this blood coming from? There's no cut. And I'm yelling and I'm crying. My head. No, Mom, it's my head. My head. Finally, I get through her panic enough that she realizes that I'm not bleeding from my hands. My face and my head, I'm covered in blood on my head. I don't remember how we got to the hospital. I needed roughly 6 to 12 stitches in my hair, right on the part. So I can now never have bangs because of the way the scar is, it automatically splits. So yeah, gravity humbled me. But honestly, that's kind of the point. A lot of the chains we're talking about today come from thinking we have to be tougher, stronger, or more capable than we actually are. Usually at our own expense. And the holidays are really good at rewarding that kind of self-sacrifice. Right up until it busts your head open. So after all that, and to move on beyond the blood, let's talk about coping. Because this time of year has a way of wrapping unhealthy coping habits in pretty paper and topping it with a bow of regret and calling it normal. A big one is overcommitting, saying yes to everything, filling every empty space on the calendar, feeling like you have to pack the day from the moment you wake up until the second you pass out. And not because you're excited, but because being busy is easier than being still. And it's not just you. Studies show nearly 70% of adults feel stressed by holiday demands, with overcommitment being one of the biggest culprits. Anxiety loves movement. It gets louder when you're quiet. If you don't stop moving, you don't have to think. And thinking around the holidays for some of us can feel dangerous. Especially if you're one of those people who maybe are having your first holiday without a family member. Or without the relationships that you wish you would have had. If you set boundaries and things like that, that quiet can feel unbearable. So instead, we stay busy. Our brain goes, now is the perfect time to learn how to make dinner rolls from scratch. No, and don't forget, we should bake those cookies, the ones we saw on Facebook that looked like perfect with the pens and all that. We have to do that. And then don't forget, we need to curate picture perfect moments so we can post them on Instagram. And all of this is in the name of pretending we got it all together. We volunteer, we host, we drive all over creation. We say yes when our body is begging, crying for us to say no. Because stillness brings feelings, and feelings can sometimes be inconvenient and unwanted, especially during the holidays. It's kind of like that fruitcake. Nobody likes it, yet somehow it shows up every year. Anyway, another one that shows up hard is emotional eating, numbing, doom scrolling. We eat past fullness because comfort feels scarce. And holiday parties make food easy and endless. So instead of telling that one aunt to mind her own business, you just grab a couple handfuls of cookies and shove them in your face. Or maybe we have 3 or 4 extra glasses of wine. Zone out watching the TV or our phones because it's easier than sitting with grief, anger, or loneliness. And listen, none of this makes you weak. None of this makes you a failure. It just makes you human. These are attempts to soothe. They just don't always help in the long run and can come with a hangover of regret. Then there's that keeping the peace. That phrase alone should come with a warning label. Because more often than not, keeping the peace means you stay quiet. You adjust. You swallow the things that hurt you so nobody else has to feel uncomfortable. You carry the pain so they don't have to look too closely at themselves. Psychologists even call this fawning, conflict avoidance that erodes your sense of self-worth. Over time, the cost of that peace is your sense of self, your sense of worth, the quiet belief that sets in that says you aren't worth standing up for. And that's where the difference between coping and surviving comes in. Coping supports you. It gives you a little bit of room to breathe. Surviving is just you trying to get through at any cost. And a lot of us are just surviving the holidays. We're surviving gatherings with people we barely tolerate, let alone enjoy being around. And then when we say that out loud, we feel guilty for admitting it. But here's the thing. Surviving was necessary once. It kept you safe. It got you here, especially when you were a kid. You didn't have a choice what family members you went to be around, what holiday parties you went to. You went where you were told, when you were told. And it didn't matter if you liked it or not. But if it's hurting you now, it's okay to question it. It's okay to look at those habits and ask, is this actually helping me? Or is it just familiar? Because awareness is not about judgment, it's about choice. And choice is where freedom starts. You owe your peace to no one but yourself. All right, let's get into the last of this year's Brews News. Because while we are all out here trying to survive the holidays, this news absolutely refuses to calm down. First up, as always, our Epstein update. So House Democrats released 19 new photos from Jeffrey Epstein's estate on December 12th, showing him alongside a wide range of powerful figures, including Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Steve Bannon, Woody Allen, Richard Branson, and others. These are more images that are coming from the Epstein estate. and really underscored just how broad and unsettling his social circle was. And it's important to say this clearly. The committee emphasizes that these photos do not accuse or implicate people pictured in crimes. They document proximity and connection, not guilt. Not everybody that knew Epstein was involved, but it does mean that there needs to be questions. Also released were images involving adult objects, which I am not naming because while I am an empowered, mature woman, there are still words that I will not say out loud because my face will turn bright red. Growth has limits. Since this show drops on Fridays, I also want to flag that Friday, December 19th is the deadline for the Epstein Files Transparency Act. So keep your eyes open because I have a feeling when we come back for season 2, I will have plenty of things to update you on between now and then. Next, let's talk about the Brown University shooting. First, my heart goes out to anyone and everyone that this tragedy has touched. This is really just a massive problem that needs some kind of addressing. But let's get into the bones of it. On December 13th, a mass shooting at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island left 2 students dead and 9 injured during their final exams. Students were ordered to shelter in place as confusion spread across the campus. President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that the suspect was in custody, but that information was incorrect. Authorities later clarified that a person of interest had been released after evidence pointed elsewhere. And this matters because just like with Charlie Kirk's murder case, premature and inaccurate statements have real consequences. For the Brown University shooting, if those kids thought it was safe because it had been Truth Socialed that the shooter was caught, they could have been targets. When you accuse people who are later cleared, they still end up being targeted by the court of public opinion. Their names get circulated, rumors stick, and public suspicion doesn't just disappear because the facts have finally caught up. Meanwhile, Mr. Cash Money Patel wasn't even on the scene working the case. He was in D.C., reporting a podcast with Stephen Miller's wife and his girlfriend. That absence only highlights how chaotic and politicized the FBI's response has become. This is exactly why relying on social media during an active crisis is dangerous. Officials' channels matter. Accuracy matters. And when time is of the essence, misinformation doesn't just confuse, it harms. If you want any more info on Patel's ongoing missteps as acting FBI director, I break down all the previous scandals on Bus Watch Cash Patel over on my Substack. And finally, Pete Hegseth. Congress is now using financial year 2026 National Defense Authorization Act to apply pressure on Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Lawmakers are threatening to withhold 25% of his travel budget unless he releases unedited video from the recent U.S. military strikes in the Caribbean. This controversy centers on a September 2nd strike against a suspected drug smuggling boat. Reports allege a so-called double tap, which is a second strike that may have targeted survivors in the water. Critics argue that if this is true, that would violate long-standing military rules against attacking shipwrecked individuals. Hegseth has refused to release the footage of the second strike, which has only intensified concerns that the Pentagon may have crossed a legal line. For a deeper look at Hegseth's trajectory, from Fox News host to embattled defense secretary, you can get my article on him, Bus Watch Pete Hegseth, on Substack. And I want to pause here a second, because none of these stories exist in a vacuum. What they all have in common is power, silence, and the cost of not questioning systems that hurt people. Whether we're talking about families, institutions, or governments, chains form when we are told not to look too closely, not to ask too many questions, or to just accept things as they are. And that's kind of the same pattern we've been talking about this entire episode, just on a bigger stage, which will bring us right back to the heart of this conversation. Okay, so here's the part. I want to slow this down switch to my calm, steady, shuffle happens voice, not my caffeinated chaos stitch happens voice. Because breaking chains does not have to be loud or destructive. You don't have to burn everything down to make the change in the ashes. Sometimes maybe just knock down a wall. Sometimes you move a door. Sometimes you stop pretending a room is usable when it never really was. A lot of us think change has to be dramatic to count. Big declarations, clean breaks, no contact, scorched earth, never looking back energy. You have to enter your final boss fight era. And while that kind of change can be necessary in some situations, most real change is quieter than that. Instead of trying to shatter every chain at once, what if you choose just one to loosen? One unwanted fruitcake you refuse to bring this year. One expectation you never agreed to that you stop crushing your soul to try and meet. One tradition you tweak so it serves your peace of mind instead of generational curses. One obligation you quietly opt out of. You don't owe anyone a full reinvention arc overnight. And boundaries, let's just talk about those for a second. Boundaries do not require a PowerPoint presentation. You don't need slides, charts, or a 3-paragraph explanation to justify yourself. It doesn't work for me this year is a complete sentence. I'm not available for that is enough. I want to do something different this year. And as I've preached in many of episodes, I don't want to is a complete sentence. If someone demands more, that is about their discomfort, not your clarity and not your responsibility. And here's the thing. Research consistently shows that setting boundaries reduces stress and can actually improve relationship satisfaction. So when you say no, you're not being selfish. You're protecting your health. One of the hardest shifts is actually replacing guilt with curiosity. Instead of asking, why do I feel bad for saying no? Try asking something else. Where did I learn that my needs come last? What small thing could I do differently this time? Curiosity opens space. And space creates room for growth. Guilt shuts everything down and keeps the weight on your shoulders. Open invites healing. Closed keeps you stuck, like a snowstorm that cancels your plans and traps you inside with your thoughts. And finally, let's talk about freedom, because it's not what Instagram sells. Freedom's not always joy-filled mornings, aesthetic candles, and a magically healed family dynamics where everyone gets along. Real freedom is often boring. It's just having less anxiety, fewer knots in your stomach, being able to take a deep breath because you don't feel the weight on your shoulders, staying home in your pajamas with popcorn and a movie marathon. Even something as easy as sleeping better, even if some people are annoyed with you. And honestly, that sounds like a them problem, not a you problem. You can be mindful without being a doormat, and you can choose peace without making a scene. Freedom is quieter, and that's how you know it's real. All right, it's time for Shuffle Happens, and today's card is the Devil. Yeah, of course it is. Honestly, if there was ever an episode this card was going to show up for, it's this one. So, as I always do, let's describe the card for a second, because energy really matters here. The scene is a dark cave with a creek running through the middle. Standing on a rock in the middle of the creek is a lone man, completely still. Fog rolls around him, thick and heavy. He's staring straight ahead at this massive devil's head shaped like a bull. The face looks like it's made of stone, with fire running up the snout and climbing into the horns. The eyes glow bright red, like they're filled with lava. And the mouth looks like the opening of another cave. Wide, dark. It's almost daring him to step inside. Upright, The devil is all about attachment. The things we think we can't live without. Habits, patterns, beliefs, roles, things that feel powerful, familiar, or safe, but in actuality, it's what's keeping us stuck. What I notice about this card is that no one is being forced. The chains are often loose. The fear is louder than the reality. The devil doesn't need to trap you. He just has to convince you that leaving would be worse. He makes you believe the chain is tighter than it actually is. The illusion of being trapped is what keeps you stuck. Reversed, the energy shifts. This is awareness. This is release. It's seeing the chain for what it really is. Realizing that the thing you've been avoiding, clinging to, or tiptoeing around doesn't actually have the power you thought it did. Reversed devil energy is that moment where you go, oh, I don't have to keep doing this. It's realizing the chain is loose and you can just slip out of it. When I look at this card alongside today's episode, it's perfect. The man in the cave isn't being chased. He's being dared. Dared to keep choosing the familiar. Dared to stay stuck. Dared to walk into the mouth of something that looks terrifying, but is also known. Breaking chains doesn't always mean fighting the monster. Sometimes it means turning around and walking away from something that only had power because you believed it did. That man doesn't have to fight the devil. He can just turn around and leave the cave. Naming the chain weakens it. Seeing it clearly breaks the spell. You don't have to enter the cave. You're allowed to choose a different path. And just like that, we are coming to the end of our season finale. Before we go, there are a few things I want to leave you with. First, this reminder, growth is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. You don't have to tear yourself apart to move forward. And you are allowed to do the holidays different this year. You're allowed to loosen one chain without shattering every tradition. Be quiet, dog, please. And above all, you are not broken. You're becoming aware. And awareness is the first step towards freedom. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget poke, like, follow, rate, leave stars, whatever good juju your listening app says to let people know it's a good show. It genuinely helps the show reach more people who might need it or like it. And speaking of what's next, we're going to be kicking off season 2 with fresh takes and new topics, or fresh takes on old topics. We're going to finish our journey through the major arcana cards and dive into the minor ones. And of course, keeping up with the chaos that is our news. And yes, we'll have Stitch Happens because life, parenting, marriage, and pets, as you can hear my dog, never stick to the schedule. And I really want to say thank you. Thank you for growing with me with this show. I hope the episodes have entertained you. But more than that, I hope maybe they helped you a little bit. Hope they reminded you that on this big roller coaster that is life, none of us are riding on it alone. We get to choose who we ride with. And I am really grateful you've chosen to ride with me. So here's to keeping your stitches sassy, your coffee strong, and your spirit grounded. Thank you for spending this season with me, and I will see you next year for season 2.